Welcome to Around Kansas. I'm Deb Goodrich,
And I'm Michelle Martin.
and it's great to be with you today. And as we get accustomed to our online format, we're making a couple of changes. We're trying to figure out what works best. And we've decided that Wednesday show, where we had, different segments in one show is probably the best thing to do. So from now on, our show will be uploaded on Wednesdays, and we will bring you history and wildlife and fun stuff all in one big show. So we're kind of happy about that because honestly, putting three shows together a week was just killing me. I'm too old for this stuff.
Well, it's it's a different age and time for TV production. And for us to be putting together three shows a week, while we absolutely love it, it is a little difficult. Deb has a very busy schedule right now. Your Santa Fe Trail events, your work at the Fort Wallace Museum, your documentary TV, your TV work, your film work, my dissertation work. We are two busy women. So, folks, we are really happy to be able to come to you once a week like we used to, just in a little different format, and bring you all the kinds of fun and interesting segments you're used to.
That reminds me, Michelle, when I was at Blackjack a couple of weeks ago or 2 years ago, whatever it was now, who can keep up with time? I had a gentleman come up and was talking about the show, and he was talking about how much he enjoyed it. I really like that Michelle Martin, he said. So the fan club is building, we're adding folks every day. So it's really nice when people come up and say things like that.
Well, that's really sweet to know, especially since it's been a while since I lived in Kansas, and I used to be at Living History events every weekend, sometimes 2 events a weekend, depending on what was going on, sometimes in the summer, 3 or 4 events a week, and I was everywhere in Kansas like you are, and so that's really sweet, and what that tells me is that we are bringing, our viewers, not only in Kansas, but around the world,
Kansas.
interesting, fun things that hopefully perk you up and give you a smile or make you think and inspire you a bit.
Well, I think so, and I sure hope so. And today we're going to bring you in our history segment some Kansas oddities. And there are a lot of Kansas oddities. And before we get started on some of our favorites, I want to give a shout out to my friend Roger Ringer, who wrote the book Kansas Oddities. And that was published with the History Press, or what's their name now, Michelle? We've got some books with them.
The
Um,
History Press.
yeah, the History Press. Or Arcadia is another imprint they have. So you can find Roger's books in a lot of places and learn about all kinds of other oddities thanks to Roger. So yeah, just want to give a shout out to him. So with that, let's talk about the picture behind me. Yes, talk about fun and uplifting stuff here. This is the execution of the Lincoln conspirators, the folks who were convicted of conspiring to kill President Lincoln in 1865. And Kansas has tons of Lincoln connections, and we'll be talking about those on future shows. But we've got a couple of interesting connections to that today that we're going to share with you.
And Deb, I have a connection to that photo behind you because one of the individuals standing on that gallows is Mary Surratt, who owned the boarding house where John Wilkes Booth and the other conspirators were said to have met and planned the execution of, or the assassination, execution, yes, of President Lincoln. And I had the opportunity at Fort Scott National Historic Site one year during their Civil War weekend event. We did a Chautauqua style program, and I portrayed Mary Surratt.
Oh, wow.
And actually, imagined if Mary could have had her say, if she could
Right.
have really had her say that day in court. And so I've actually portrayed Mary Surratt. So that makes our first oddity a little creepy, a little eerie for me.
Well, I've actually spoken to the Surratt Society in what used to be Surratt, Maryland. They changed it, wonder why, after that. And I think now is it at Clinton, Maryland? I'm not sure. But it was a wonderful group, and they are really full of great historians. And they do a lot of cool events throughout the years. And for the direct connection to this execution, we go to the Kansas State Historical Society. And you just can't believe the things that show up. But as Michelle and I well know, folks in the 19th century were the most notorious souvenir collectors
Hmm.
I think of any time in world history. And they destroyed and dismantled things to get souvenirs. So once the hanging had occurred, there were four people hanged at once. The scaffold was taken apart, the rope was cut up into pieces and given to folks as souvenirs. The scaffold was taken apart. So we have in the Kansas State Historical Society, and it has been on display from time to time, the piece of the scaffolding that Mary Surratt was hanged from. And
Hmm.
one of a historian, expert, and gosh, I'm so sorry, his name escapes me, but he examined all the photographs, close ups of the scaffold, and then the piece of the scaffold that we have, and figured out that that is the one that Mary, bless her heart, was hanged from. So just you can't make this stuff up. You just really can't.
Yeah. And you're right. It has been on display from time to time. If you actually want to learn a little more about it, if you visit the Kansas Memory website, you can actually put in the search box Mary Surratt Gallows, and then you can see it and it gives you some more information. And yeah, it's obviously, we have those connections to Lincoln. One of our strongest connections is Senator James Henry Lane, who during the war was responsible for and put together, if you will, his own little private Army protective detail to help provide security in Washington, D.C., and for the president. And, um, Lane himself, after the assassination, really never recovered from that. I think he felt personally responsible, as if, obviously he had somehow in some way let the president down. So, we have, our connections to Lincoln are numerous. And
Jim Lane was also the man that kept Mary Surratt's daughter from reaching President Johnson to beg for a pardon for
yes.
um, for her mother, and he was physically restrained her at the door. He and another senator
Hmm.
physically restrained her, and yeah, so tons of connections. And another really cool connection, not quite as depressing, is the beer pitcher
Yeah.
from which beer that Abraham Lincoln drank while he was in Kansas was poured. And that was at the Delahaye home in Leavenworth when Lincoln was visiting in 1859 and preparing to run, kind of testing his speeches and all that stuff for
Hmm.
his campaign. And that is on exhibit in the Frontier Army Museum on the post at Fort Leavenworth, along with the carriage that he rode in and
Yes.
all kinds of other cool stuff. So yeah, some really cool Lincoln connections there.
And folks, that is a fantastic museum to visit. If you have not, you need to put it on your list. But do remember, getting on post will take you a little more time, not only because of safety issues, but COVID. So you'll want to make sure that your driver's license is current, you have your current insurance and registration, and your license plate tags are current, because if they're not, you will not get on post. So definitely go to Fort Leavenworth and visit the folks at the Frontier Army Museum and tell them we sent you. It is a beautiful museum with amazing pieces of American history that you will want to see.
It's way cool. So, Michelle, you've got a connection to another bad girl that has a Kansas connection. So why don't you talk about that oddity?
Yes, I do, Deb. What is it about me and bad girls?
I don't know.
Well, I've had the opportunity working with KTWU and our good friends Jim Kelly and Scott Williams when he was working there to work on Sunflower Journeys. And one of the Kansas bad girls that I portrayed was the notorious Kate Bender of the Bloody Benders. And another Kansas oddity at the Kansas State Historical Society is a knife that was discovered inside a clock that belonged to the Bloody Benders after their crimes and misdeeds had been discovered, and townspeople and others descended upon their wayside stop and began excavating and finding the 13 bodies that we know of. And so, and that again is an item that is from time to time on display. And it is pretty darn creepy. But it is said that Kate Bender, after her father and brother cracked people in the heads with the big hammers, it is said that she finished off victims with a swift cut of the knife across the throat. So it could possibly be the very knife she used to finish the deed.
Wow. Oh, wow. What a gruesome story. The
Mhm.
Benders, the story of the Benders has been retold in countless old TV shows. I remember one on Big Valley, a story where Nick Barkley falls in love with a girl and she's based on Kate Bender.
Mhm.
But so many of those old movies and TV shows based plots on the story of the Benders. So, yeah, really.
Yeah. Well, even Laura Ingalls Wilder later in her life, after she had written her books, Laura gave a speech at a library. I believe it was in Detroit, Michigan. She gave a speech and in which she said that her father, Charles, had been went and helped look for the Benders after the crimes had been committed, or that he had had an association of some nature with the Benders. And the problem with that is the fact that the Ingalls family left Kansas in 1871, and the Benders were coming in around 1871, and their crimes were discovered in 1873. So it would have been a little hard for Pa to make it from Pepin, Wisconsin, back to Kansas to look for Kate Bender. But it
Yeah,
shows you the power of that Bender lore and myth and legend, and how people were wanting to be somehow connected to this infamous, notorious, well-known Western event.
it also shows you how the facts get in the way of a good story sometimes. Bless her.
Exactly. Foreign historians.
That's right. So, what else have you got for us, Michelle?
Well, actually, right now on display, and I believe you're familiar with the museum. I believe it's in Hill City. The Automotive Museum has another.
This
Sorry,
is
folks.
terrible.
It's just
This is
we
this
can't
is
help
another
it.
connection to a presidential assassination. We did not plan it that way. It just,
No,
gosh.
it just
So
happened that way.
it just
But
happened that way.
right now, you can actually see the hearse that carried the body of assassinated President John Fitzgerald Kennedy from the hospital to Air Force One when his body was taken back to Washington, D.C. And we're all familiar with the famous photograph of Vice President Johnson being sworn in aboard Air Force One with a stunned Jackie Kennedy there, wearing her beautiful pink suit with the pill, that had that pillbox hat that everybody was emulating, but it is that blood spattered pink suit.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so that actual hearse is on display.
It is on display at the Graham County Auto and Art Museum that just opened this year. And Stephen Tebow had from Hill City had a big car collection and he wanted to show it off. Craig Simoneau, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, is president of the museum. And that white Cadillac, and Marla went to see this. I haven't gotten up to see it yet because, like you said, my schedule. It is a 1964 Cadillac hearse and it is white. And Marla said that part of the exhibit talks about Jackie asking them for a white hearse because she didn't like the black ones. And this
Mhm.
guy had a hearse that was set up as an ambulance, because I can remember when hearses and ambulances were the same thing,
We're the
and they
same.
were answering, the wreck
Yes.
calls and all this stuff. So this was for an ambulance. And the gentleman said, there's nothing in there that will strap this coffin down. And Jackie insisted on riding in the back with JFK. And they were very, very concerned that if it shifted, it would not be good. And so she she insisted, and that's the way it went. And they drove very, very carefully and very slowly to the airport. But what an incredible piece of American history that is temporarily, this is not a permanent exhibit. In fact, the museum is changing out exhibits. They have some permanent and some revolving exhibits. So this will not be there forever. So folks, look up that really cool museum in Hill City, and they've got a lot of other really interesting stuff too.
Yes. So that's fascinating
It really
to
is.
have that vehicle in Kansas, to be able to see it. And of course, we have so many visitors who can remember exactly where they were
Sure.
when they heard that news. I can just, I was not alive then, but my mother was an army brat, and my mother was living in at Fort Knox, Kentucky, where my grandfather was stationed. And when news of the president's assassination came through, all the teachers told their students what had happened. They dismissed school. The students were all told they must walk straight home, immediately home. They must go nowhere else. And she said when they came home, my grandmother had them go ahead and get what they would consider their go bags ready and had them by the door. And the men were at duty stations because there was the fear that the Russians would launch nuclear missiles and attack the United States because the president had been assassinated.
And there were
And
suspicions that the Russians were involved. I mean, nobody
yeah,
knew, just like with the Lincoln assassination, nobody knew if there was a conspiracy or the extent of it. And of course, that's still being debated today.
yes,
So, yeah, that it may seem, looking back a little extreme, but when you're going through it and you're looking forward, it's a pretty, pretty scary time.
yes. And my mother said she remembers sitting in the living room on the floor with my uncles, my grandma sitting on the couch, and they had the television on. And she remembered watching all of this unfolding on the television live.
Right.
And so, my mother, like millions of other Americans, when the TV crews, they showed that hearse pulling out onto the tarmac toward Air Force One. You saw that happening on live TV.
Yeah.
And so, for many folks who might want to visit the museum, this will actually, this will transport you right back to that. I know exactly where I was when this happened.
It sure will. Yeah. So that's an incredible, incredible exhibit.
Now,
Yeah.
Deb, our last Kansas oddity, you have lots of connections to, given your years of research and the fact that, let's just face it, you've got a history girl crush on Miles Keogh.
Yes, I do. And it's such a bizarre thing that in Kansas we have the horse that Keogh was riding at the Little Bighorn. He had two horses, but he was riding Comanche that day. And of course, the men with Custer were all killed. And Captain Miles Keogh commanded Fort Wallace in 1866 and 67. It's the only post he ever commanded. And so I love telling the stories of Keogh when people come to visit the museum. And he was really responsible for turning it from just a outpost into a real fort. And we're raising money for our Miles Keogh Memorial Library now. He established the first library in Wallace County on the post in 1867. So yes, we adore Keogh. We have our Keogh Emerald Banquet every year. Any excuse
Mhm.
to mention Keogh. So my first connection, though, when I moved to Kansas, was visiting the Dyke Museum at KU on KU campus, and they actually have the taxidermied Comanche on exhibit, and he
Mhm.
was refurbished a few years ago. So now they have him behind, in a climate controlled, sealed box that you can see him. And my grandson, I got to tell you this, my grandson Bubba, of course, he's got the history gene. I'm so proud of him.
Mhm.
And he has pictures of Comanche hanging in his bedroom. And when I first took him and his brother to see Comanche in person, I don't know, he might have been 4, 5, I don't know. He was small. And so we looked at the other exhibits, and then we came back to say goodbye to Comanche. And he just sat down beside of him there on the floor. And I said, well, it's time to go. No, I'll just stay here. And it was so sweet. It was just so sweet. So, it is the most popular attraction,
Mhm.
even though they've got some other cool things. That is the most popular attraction there. And of course,
Yeah.
Comanche was retired after his recovery from the battlefield, and he spent the rest of his life at Fort Riley and died at a ripe old age. And the farrier who was with him wrote the most touching account, and that is part of the exhibit there. So, yeah, by all means, go by
Yes.
respects to Comanche.
And if you don't care about the connections to Keo and the battle at the Little Bighorn or the Greasy Grass, um, those who are animal lovers will absolutely fall in love with the story of Comanche and the fact that he survived his battle wounds. Because many horses during battle, if they were wounded severely, many horses would be put down.
They were put
And
down. The
the
reason Comanche was not was because he was Keogh's horse.
yes,
That's why he was saved, because Keogh was so beloved, and that's why
yes.
they saved Comanche. And I think he had 13 wounds, if I remember correctly, around a dozen anyway, but I think it was 13.
Yeah.
So it's an absolute miracle
And
that survived.
and folks, if you're an animal lover and you also can get a little emotional, make sure you have some Kleenex with you when you read the farrier's story,
Uh,
because I can tell you when I've gone and read the story, if I don't have Kleenex, I'm using a shirt sleeve, and every single time I see it, I cry. And I'm not a big horse person because I'm a short person and I'm a little terrified of horses, but I love animals just in general. And when I read that and this beautiful bond that that farrier had with Comanche all those years, and the dedication the men showed that animal after his service as an army horse, wow, it's just nothing short of absolutely it's beautiful,
it is a
and
beautiful story.
it is just beautiful, and it just makes your heart burst with love and joy.
It really
So,
does. So after our break, we're going to talk about some other animals. We're going to talk about noodling, not canoodling. I can't even say it. Canoodling. We're not going to talk
canoodling,
about canoodling. We're going to talk about, yeah.
noodling.
So y'all come back.
In 1821, a trade route was opened from Missouri in the United States across prairies and mountains to Mexico. In 2021, we will mark 200 years of epic conflicts and grand adventures, larger-than-life personalities, and sweeping landscapes. Join us on an historic journey. The Santa Fe Trail lives on.
Find us on social media or santafetrail.org.
Welcome to the Western Kansas Wildlife Travel Center, right here in my hometown of Oakley, Kansas. We're the front door of Western Kansas, located on 3 main highways, I-70, US 83, and US 40. And all those roads lead to history, beautiful scenery, and adventure, no matter which direction you go. We now have an IHOP. That brand that you've trusted up and down the road in all your travels is staffed with local folks, real people, just like you and me, and we're waiting on you to join us. So for fun, adventure, fuel up, fuel your body, and let's have some fun. Welcome back. And Michelle, it looks like you're about to be lunch up there. What's going on with you?
Well, our wildlife segment today is about catfish. Now, Deb, your background is how I like catfish best. Well, I like to look down in the water and see them. I don't like to fish for them. I don't like to noodle for them. What I really like is to see them dredged in some cornmeal and fried up in a skillet like what you have behind you.
That's exactly right. When I was a kid growing up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, our river, our go-to river was the New River, which I think is the only river in North America that flows north. And it is a beautiful, beautiful spot. And we had a lot of family over there. And my cousin Larry is like the fish whisperer. And he and Daddy would go out at night while we were camping and put out ley lines. And I can't remember what other people call them, but they called them ley lines. And the next day when they checked those lines, I kid you not, the catfish, the mouth would be that big. They would be as long as Daddy's body. And I'm like, I am never sticking my toe in that water again. And they are scary fish. So when I learned about people noodling for these fish, which means they're just sticking their arm in a hole in the creek bank or the river bank underwater to pull the catfish out, I'm like, this is insane. This is the craziest thing I have ever heard of.
You know, Deb, the first time I heard about noodling was when I lived in Oklahoma. And I had the opportunity, I was an invited speaker at the Trail Dance Film Festival in Duncan, Oklahoma. And I was talking about the importance of historical accuracy and costuming and sets and so on. But I got to watch all the other films in the festival, and one of them was called Okie Noodling. And then there was Okie Noodling 2, and I believe there's an Okie Noodling 3 and 4. And they followed different individuals who went out and noodled. But these are individuals who are world champion noodlers
Yes, people.
for the size of the fish they're able to bring in or the sheer number of fish they are able to noodle in a specific time period. And you're right, they are putting their arms under the water, into the mud, into the silt, the riverbank, and they feel for the mouth of the catfish and put their hand in that mouth and grab it and pull it up out of the water. And if you haven't noticed, catfish, those spines, off the face that look like the whiskers, but also their teeth. And on more than one occasion in the film, when the person's arm comes up out of the water with the catfish, it's also running with blood because they've been bitten. So you can put me down no for noodling.
It is just insane. And when talk about champion noodlers, when I had my radio talk show in Topeka, I interviewed a guy from Missouri who was at that point world champion noodler. And I'm like, you have to be crazy. And he laughed and he said, yeah. And he was training his 12-year-old granddaughter to follow in his footsteps. And I'm like, oh my gosh, these catfish could swallow her whole. And they
Mhm.
were, we also had folks back home that were um, getting turtles. And I don't know, a turtle is about as scary to me. They pull out those huge turtles, and those they do pull out by the tail. So, because they will go in head first. And so they do pull them out by the tail, which I guess is some advantage. But I'm like, oh no, that's just crazy. But again, the end result is you get this great catfish to fry up. But man, I am going to find an easier way to catch it than the noodling. I love fried catfish. There used to be a place in Topeka, just a dive joint. I mean, it had purple carpet on the walls. I mean, seriously, a shack that was just probably held up by the grease. And he had the best catfish I have ever tasted in my life. And you could get this bucket of nuggets, like, a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken, and you go in and get a bucket of those catfish nuggets. And oh my God, they were so good. Catfish had been pulled out of the Kansas River.
And Deb, it's interesting because in looking at catfish for this segment, I read numerous articles in Kansas newspapers and in wildlife bulletins over the last 5 or 6 years. And they're saying that the catfish that are coming out of Kansas rivers are larger than they've seen before, that they are on massive proportions. And looking at some of the photographs of these catfish people are hauling in, they're the size of a child.
Oh,
They're
they are.
gigantic. And I'm thinking, no, there's no way I'm going to stick my hand under the water and it's murky and you can't see and try to pull something out the size of a small to medium sized child, if not bigger. No, no, thank you. But when you're ready to fillet that bad boy up and dredge it with some cornmeal and fry it up, I'm all there. I'm all about helping you eat that. I will help you make sure that catfish does not go to waste.
That's right. And the other thing, when you think about how strong a fish is, you
Yes.
watch videos, and the guys that are pulling in, I mean, just a trout, just an average sized trout, it's a fight. One of these monsters, holy cow. They've
Hmm.
got the strength of Godzilla under there. And like you said, the water is murky.
Hmm.
You cannot see. They're feeling for it. And like I was on the phone with my buddy Bill Rippon this morning, who grew up around Sublette. Now, Bill commented that Sublette is closer to hell than to water. So I don't know what water they found to go noodling in, but there was an old guy in the community that took him noodling when he was a kid. He was 10 or 12 or something. And so they get in the creek or river or whatever, like I said, whatever water they found. They must have traveled some distance for this. And the guy reaches in, he goes underwater and reaches in and he pulls out a snake and tosses that over his head and then sticks his hand back in. And Bill said, I'm done. I'm out of
Hmm.
here. That's enough. So that happens. It's not just, oh, it could happen. No, that happens. And those crazy people go back in. The guy just went right back in there. Like, oh my gosh, that is.
Yeah. And Deb, in the 19th century, it's not uncommon to read in men's journals or in women's diaries, journals, and letters, and they talk about the men going out and fishing and bringing home the catfish. I cannot tell you the number of times I've read women's diaries talking about having to clean the catfish and how to prepare the catfish. And some women not minding, other women being terrified, especially women who are coming from the East and who'd never been exposed to the catfish, going ahead and having their husbands bring them in and drop them in the kitchen or drop the pail in, and they need to start cleaning and scaling and gutting and filleting. And oh, if I'd never seen one before, I think I would have thought, oh my gosh, what prehistoric creature's been dropped in my kitchen? I don't think so.
I don't think so either. But you go to Cracker Barrel, you don't have to worry about looking that fish in the eye. Folks, we've
That's
got
right.
a great fun segment for you coming up, so stay with us.
Howdy, I'm Seth Hayes, and welcome to my hometown, from then to now. Council Grove has a rich history as deep as the prairie tallgrass. Spend the day visiting 25 historic sites, or explore the unique shops and restaurants, or mosey out of town along the Santa Fe Trail. You all visit my hometown, Council Grove, in the heart of the Flint Hills.
Okay, looks like it's time for our tour. Welcome to the Fort Wallace Museum. Here at the museum, you're going to find some really interesting stuff like our replica stagecoach from the Butterfield Overland Dispatch. We've got facades from the fort buildings. We've got an 1870s flag. There's a plesiosaur that was discovered locally. We've got the Ray pump organ collection. We're a little bitty place with a great big story, and we'd love to have you.
Welcome back. I'm Deb Goodrich, and behind me is the Dyke Museum on KU campus. And if I move over a little bit, maybe you can see that little girl behind me. This is from a few years ago, and I thought this picture was so stinking cute. But that's my grandson, Devin, and the little girl is Kaylee Testa. And we had taken a bunch of the kids to the Dyke Museum, and of course, they had a wonderful time. And this is one of my favorite pictures.
And I'm Michelle Martin, and I look like I'm going to be a snack again, this time for a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And this fellow is located at the Sternberg in Hayes. And actually, Deb, our good friend Ian works at the Sternberg. Hi, Ian. We miss you. But we love the educational work you do at the Sternberg for all the families and children and folks who come through.
Yeah, so we're really fortunate in Kansas. In fact, I've thought about writing a book about stones and bones because we have such great rock formations. We've got, interesting geology, and we have some fantastic fossils. And so these are just a couple of the places that have those on exhibit. And they are phenomenal institutions, both of these. And then we've got some others we're going to talk about too. So the Dyke Museum, we were talking earlier about Comanche being one of the oddities in Kansas. And this is his home. And also within the Dyke, we were talking about catfish earlier. They have a pretty doggone big fossil or skeletized remains. I can't remember exactly what it is. It's huge catfish that came out of the Kansas River a long time ago. So yeah, you can find catfish, and you can find dinosaurs, and you can find just all manner of crazy crazy things there, and some incredible science. And this was named for Dyke, D-Y-C-H-E, who was a scientist and professor, and just a all around very interesting man. Just think Indiana Jones, and we'll give you a picture of Mr. Dyke. Had mustache, and he was really cool.
Well, Deb, the Sternberg in Hayes is fantastic because you get that mix of obviously the fossilized remains, but they also have live creatures. They have turtles, they have some tortoises, they have some different lizards. I believe they have some skink salamanders. I kind of stay away from the snakes. They're not my favorite. But they have some incredible live living critters there that you are able to see, along with obviously these amazing dioramas and the fossils and the fossilized remains of creatures who called Kansas their home many, 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 many eons before either of us were around. And
They do cool little frogs too. Those really colorful little frogs.
yes,
They're
and
really cool.
our good friend Ian, who is there, who works in the education and outreach division. does some amazing programs. And I have to say, folks, the Sternberg did the most incredible programs during COVID when things were closed, when museum staff did come in and rotate to work on site. They were doing a lot of Facebook Live events where they would introduce you to different parts of the museum, different fossils, different folks who work there, different live critters. Ian even went out and did a few things that were remote, talking about Kansas geology. So, folks, go out to their Facebook page and take a look for those videos archived. They were not only instructional and educational, but they were fun. And that is one thing about the Sternberg. When you go there, you will have a ball.
Oh, and it's so kid friendly,
Yeah.
I will warn you that the T-Rex is kind of loud and scary. And
Mhm.
when we took the little grandkids, yeah, that was pretty frightening. So just hang on, hold hands when you go in, because they might get a little scared. You know what? I think they've got some big fish there too. Talk about
Yeah.
live stuff. I think they got some big fish in the lobby there before
Yeah.
you go in. So yeah, they've just got it all. And the videos you're talking about, one of them that was so funny is when they were taking those huge turtles outside and
Yeah.
hosing them off, and they stink. You know,
Yes.
uh, they're stinky animals. And yeah, so they got out in the grass and had a good time and got hosed off, and
Mhm.
those were really fun videos.
Yeah. And, Deb, I think in your hometown of Oakley, there is another museum dedicated to Kansas's fossilized past that our viewers need to know about.
Just a couple of blocks from me, the Ficht Fossil Museum, and it is a small but really incredibly interesting museum. We have some fantastic fossils in there, and my good friend Jody Reed is the executive director, and they just have so much fun in there. But yeah, some pretty awesome fossils, and those were collected and donated, by local folks. And they've got some other exhibits in there that go along with the history of the town, and just a lot of cool stuff. They sometimes have revolving exhibits, um, but those fossils are the foundation, and they're really cool. And Mrs. Fick, Fick, did the craziest art. She would take like shark's teeth or just different items and make this outrageous art that's on exhibit there. And some worlds you might call it gaudy, but I think it would really fall under the category of folk art. And it really is cool. It's really interesting to see, and just kind of funny. So yeah, it's a very interesting museum. Really comfortable and very nice. It's in the same building as our library here. So you got the library in one wing and the Fick Fossil Museum on the other. And it's just a great place. It got a playground around it. It's right there with the park. So you can have a picnic and let the kids play, and just have spend a better part of a day there and just have a good time.
And Deb, if folks come to visit you in Oakley, obviously they can stop off at Mittens and grab a bite of lunch at the IHOP and see the Western Kansas Wildlife Travel Center there. They can go to the FIC. They can go visit the enormous bronze of Bill Cody hunting buffalo, but they can continue on west and go to Wallace, to the
Mhm.
Fort Wallace Museum, and actually see one of I think, the most intriguing and amazing creatures, which is the casting of plesiosaur. I believe it is the plesiosaur that Captain Theophilus Turner discovered when he was the post surgeon at Fort Wallace after the Civil War. And I mean, it is incredible when you come in the museum and you come in through and you're kind of going through time and you meet native people and you're going to the fort and then all of a sudden you turn and you can't help but look up because it's suspended from the ceiling and it is enormous and you can see why they referred to it as a dragon because it's so huge. It had such an odd and unique shape from anything they probably had ever seen or imagined before. And so you can go on and see um, Thoth's dragon, as he's affectionately called, and you can see the life casting of Captain Theophilus Turner sitting at his desk looking up at his discovery and
Forevermore.
forevermore. And, Kansas has probably one of the most incredible and varied and diverse natural histories of anywhere. Given that fact, we were the bottom of the inland sea for a long period of time. And when those waters receded, what was left behind has been intriguing. Fossil hunters and scientists and paleontologists and geologists ever since. So, Kansas has no shortage of amazing natural history museums where you can take the family. That is the great thing. These are all incredibly family friendly places.
They really are. And while we're talking about significant finds, up at the museum in Minneapolis, Kansas, Jetty Condrey, who was the director there, I'm not sure if he's retired or moved on. His dad discovered a fossil while he was plowing one time. There's actually a children's book about it, the only one of its kind ever found, and it is named for him. So it is, yeah. So in these little out of the way places, Russell Springs, the Butterfield Trail
Mhm.
Museum at Russell Springs has some really cool fossils because, like you said, they were everywhere,
Mhm.
are everywhere. Who knows what's still out there to be discovered. We have, at Fort Wallace, the reason the plesiosaur is there, like you said, it was discovered by our post surgeon because it wasn't that far away. It was like 12, 15 miles from the post. Well, 15 miles maybe in the other direction to the west of Wallace. Recently, a mosasaur was discovered. So we have a casting of that mosasaur head, his jaw, and maybe we'll get some more of it at some time. But that mosasaur, oh my goodness, what a scary, scary looking beast. So
Mhm.
yeah, the ocean was wild. It was a wild place to be. Would have been scary to be a little fish then.
Woo. You definitely, if you were a little fish, you definitely were snack food for those big
You
boys.
were
That is
snacky.
for sure.
That's right. Well, it's been great spending this time with you. And like I said, we are hoping to be uploaded on Wednesdays now. So you can find us on Wednesday, but you can watch us anytime you like. And please share that information with your friends. And if you got a big fish story, share that with us too. Just let us know what you want to cover. And I have just got there you go. That's little Kaylee. I just got to show people her picture real quick because she's just so adorable. So until next time, I'm Deb Goodrich,
And I'm Michelle Martin.
and we will see you somewhere around Kansas.
Yes.